Have you thought about giving up? Not in a dramatic way, not with loud declarations or visible collapse, but quietly, in the hidden chambers of your heart. The kind of giving up that happens when hope becomes heavy, when waiting feels like punishment, and when prayers begin to sound repetitive even to your own ears. You still wake up, you still function, you still smile when required. But deep inside, there is a question that refuses to be silenced. How long must I wait? You have waited longer than you ever imagined you could. Longer than what seemed reasonable. Longer than what others told you was wise. There were moments when you convinced yourself that patience was strength, and other moments when patience felt like slow surrender. You watched time pass, seasons change, people move on, and yet, you remained standing in the same emotional place, holding onto something invisible, something unfinished, something that has no clear explanation except this quiet certainty in your soul that refuses to die. You asked yourself if this delay is a sign. If maybe you misunderstood God. If maybe you heard your own desire instead of divine direction. And the most painful thought of all crept in during the darkest nights: what if this was never meant to happen? But what if the silence you are experiencing is not abandonment? What if it is authorship? What if, even now, when you feel forgotten, heaven is still writing this love story, line by line, detail by detail, far beyond what you can see? God's silence has never meant God's absence. In Scripture, silence often precedes revelation. In creation, darkness existed before light was spoken. In the womb, growth happens in absolute quiet. And in love stories written by God Himself, the waiting is never wasted, it is formative. You are not waiting because nothing is happening. You are waiting because everything is happening where you cannot yet see it. Every tear you have shed has been counted, not ignored. Every prayer you whispered when words failed has already been answered in ways you do not yet recognize. Every dream you tried to suppress because it hurt too much to hold has not been discarded. God does not tease the hearts He created. He does not awaken desires with no intention of fulfillment. And He does not mark two souls for one another only to forget where He placed them. You feel forgotten, but God has not lost the address of your heart. And that person, the one you are trying so hard not to think about, the one whose presence still lingers in your spirit long after logic says you should have moved on, they have not been forgotten either. Distance does not erase divine markings. Time does not dilute what God has sealed. Silence does not undo spiritual alignment. There are connections that are not maintained by communication, but by covenant. You may not know what they are thinking. You may not know what they are feeling. You may not know why circumstances have created separation instead of union. But heaven knows, and more importantly, heaven is involved. Sometimes God removes visibility so that faith can mature. Sometimes He hides the ending so that trust can be born. Because if you could see how close the breakthrough is, you would no longer walk by faith, you would run by sight. And faith, not certainty, is what transforms love from infatuation into something sacred. Ask yourself honestly, have you been waiting for the person, or have you been waiting for God to prove that He keeps His promises? These are not the same thing. Because the delay is not only about timing between two people. It is about alignment between heaven and heart. It is about preparing you to receive without fear, to love without insecurity, to stand without needing reassurance every step of the way. The waiting has stripped illusions from you. It has exposed wounds. It has taught you to survive without guarantees. It has forced you to face yourself. And that is not punishment. That is preparation. You are becoming someone who can sustain what you once only desired. There is a reason why what is meant for you often arrives after you are exhausted. Because by then, ego is quiet, control is loosened, and faith is no longer theoretical, it is lived. God often waits until you stop trying to manage the outcome before He reveals it. Not because He is cruel, but because surrender is the doorway through which miracles enter. And that love, the one you feel called to, the one that keeps resurfacing no matter how many times you try to bury it, this is not an accident. It carries a spiritual fingerprint. It feels different because it is different. It doesn't fade with distraction. It doesn't disappear with time. It doesn't weaken when circumstances are unfavorable. If anything, it becomes more refined, more painful, more quiet, but also more profound. That is not obsession. That is recognition. Some loves are not loud because they are not meant to consume you, they are meant to anchor you. They are not about immediate gratification but eternal resonance. They don't pull you away from God, they push you closer to Him. And if loving someone has driven you deeper into prayer rather than farther from it, that love has already passed a spiritual test. God has not forgotten you, and He has certainly not forgotten the story He Himself began. But here is the question that heaven is gently asking you now: are you truly ready to receive what you keep asking for? Not ready in longing, but ready in trust. Because there comes a moment in every divine process when God pauses, not to withhold, but to see if you will let go of fear. To see if you will stop measuring His faithfulness by the calendar. To see if you will trust Him even if the ending does not unfold the way you imagined. This is the moment where many give up, not because they no longer care, but because caring has become too vulnerable. Giving up feels safer than hoping again. But safety has never been the currency of miracles. If you walk away now, you will never know how close you were. If you harden your heart now, you may protect yourself from pain, but you will also block the very thing you prayed for. If you stop believing now, you will never witness the impossible thing that only happens after human endurance is exhausted. Heaven works hardest when everything appears stuck. Behind the scenes, God rearranges timing, softens hearts, dismantles resistance, and clears paths you cannot yet see. Delays are often disguises, detours are often protection, and silence is often strategy. That person still carries the spiritual mark of a love God reserved for you, not because they are perfect, not because the journey is easy, but because the connection serves a purpose beyond romance. It is meant to teach you about grace, about patience, about surrender, about the difference between possession and partnership. This story is not late. It is precise. So before you decide to give up, ask yourself one more time: are you willing to trust God again? Not with conditions, not with deadlines, not with ultimatums, but with a quiet, surrendered faith that says, if this is from you, I will wait. And if it is not, I trust you to heal me without destroying my hope. That prayer alone shifts everything. You do not need to force the ending. You do not need to chase the outcome. You do not need to prove your faith by suffering endlessly. All you are being asked to do now is remain open. Remain soft. Remain willing. Because the impossible does not announce itself loudly. It arrives gently, after the moment you almost walked away. And when it does, you will realize that the wait did not break you. It built you. And the love story God was writing in silence. It was never about delay. It was about depth. There is a quiet courage required to keep believing when nothing changes on the surface. It is easier to trust when signs are visible, when progress is measurable, when reassurance arrives on schedule. But the kind of faith you are being asked to carry now is different. It is not loud. It does not argue. It does not demand proof. It simply remains, steady, breathing, alive, despite the absence of evidence. This is the faith that matures souls. You may not realize it, but the waiting has already altered the architecture of your heart. You no longer love from illusion. You no longer hope from desperation. What remains is something purer, quieter, and far more resilient. You have learned how to sit with uncertainty without collapsing. You have learned how to pray without immediate reward. You have learned how to love without possession. These are not small lessons. They are rare. Most people abandon the process before reaching this depth. They trade mystery for convenience. They settle for what is available instead of what is aligned. They confuse peace with numbness and call it healing. But you did not do that. Even when you tried to walk away emotionally, something in you refused to fully disengage. Not because you were weak, but because something sacred was still unfinished. God does not leave unfinished work unattended. There is a reason this connection keeps returning to your awareness at unexpected moments. Not as obsession, but as remembrance. Not as longing, but as recognition. It surfaces in quiet pauses, in sudden emotions, in moments when your guard is down. And every time it appears, you feel the same mixture of tenderness and ache, as if your soul remembers something your mind is still trying to understand. This is not coincidence. Some bonds are not formed through interaction alone, but through assignment. They are activated not by proximity, but by purpose. You were not meant to rush this. You were meant to grow into it. And so was the other soul involved. You may wonder why God would allow such distance if the outcome is union. Why separation, confusion, and silence would be necessary if love is truly ordained. But consider this: premature union often destroys what time could have refined. When two people meet before they are ready, love becomes contaminated by fear, insecurity, and unmet wounds. God delays not to deny, but to protect. Protection often feels like absence. Right now, you are being protected from loving with old patterns. From repeating cycles you once normalized. From losing yourself in someone before fully finding who you are in God. The waiting has been teaching you self-possession, discernment, and spiritual grounding. It has taught you how to stand alone without bitterness. How to hope without demanding. How to release control without losing direction. And while you feel as though you have been standing still, heaven has been moving constantly. Things are shifting in ways you cannot track. Conversations are happening you are not part of. Realizations are unfolding you have not witnessed. Hearts are being confronted. Resistance is being dismantled. What feels delayed to you may feel overwhelming to someone else. God often works on both sides unevenly, not because one matters more, but because each soul requires a different process. The absence of contact does not mean the absence of impact. You are still influencing each other on a level beyond words. That is why you feel moments of inexplicable emotion. That is why certain prayers feel heavier than others. That is why some nights carry an unexplainable intensity. Spiritual connections do not obey physical boundaries. They communicate through intuition, emotion, and awareness. And yet, this is not meant to trap you in waiting forever. There will come a moment when the season shifts. When clarity replaces confusion. When silence gives way to truth. When what was once hidden becomes undeniable. But that moment does not arrive because you force it. It arrives because you are ready to receive it without fear. God is not testing your endurance to see how much pain you can tolerate. He is strengthening your discernment so that when the moment comes, you will recognize it without doubt. So that when the door opens, you will not hesitate out of insecurity or rush out of anxiety. You will step forward calmly, grounded, aware, and free. Freedom is the true goal of this waiting. Freedom from fear of loss. Freedom from needing outcomes to feel whole. Freedom from attachment disguised as love. What remains when all of that falls away is something holy, love that is chosen, not clung to. Love that is offered, not demanded. Love that trusts God more than it fears disappointment. This is the kind of love heaven entrusts with miracles. You are closer now than you have ever been. Not closer in distance, but closer in alignment. Closer in readiness. Closer in truth. Even if it feels like nothing is happening, everything that matters is happening. And so the question is no longer whether the story will continue. The question is whether you will allow yourself to remain open without becoming attached to the outcome. Whether you will trust God even if the unfolding looks different than your imagination. Whether you will continue to believe in goodness without needing guarantees. This is where faith becomes peace. Because when you truly trust God, waiting no longer feels like suffering. It becomes stillness. It becomes listening. It becomes rest. You stop scanning the horizon for signs. You stop interpreting silence as rejection. You stop negotiating with God through anxiety. You simply live, present, grounded, available. And ironically, this is often the moment when everything changes. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped gripping. Not because you gave up, but because you surrendered. And surrender is not loss. It is alignment. If this love is meant to return, it will return without forcing. If it is meant to manifest, it will do so with clarity. If it is meant to transform into something different, it will do so with healing. God does not confuse those who trust Him. He may take time, but He does not take peace. You are not being asked to wait forever. You are being asked to wait faithfully. There is a difference. Faithful waiting does not pause life. It does not withhold joy. It does not put your heart in a prison of expectation. It lives fully, loves openly, and trusts deeply, without demanding control. It knows that what is truly meant will not require constant anxiety to maintain. What belongs to you will find you. What is aligned will not miss you. And what God has written will not be erased by time, distance, or doubt. So remain soft, remain honest, remain present. Let yourself feel without clinging. Let yourself hope without forcing. Let yourself trust without conditions. Because when the moment comes, and it will come, you will understand why nothing happened sooner. Why the silence lasted. Why the waiting stretched you. Why your heart had to break open before it could hold something this real. And you will see that the story never stalled. It was unfolding, exactly as it needed to. There is a sacred tension in this space you are standing in now. Not the tension of anxiety, but the tension of becoming. It is the space between who you were when you first began praying for this story and who you are now, steadier, quieter, more aware. You may not feel stronger, but you are more rooted. And roots grow in darkness, unseen, long before anything appears above ground. You once asked God for answers. Now, without realizing it, you have learned how to live without them. That alone tells you how much you have changed. At the beginning of this journey, you wanted certainty. You wanted signs that could be interpreted easily. You wanted timelines that made sense. You wanted reassurance that did not require so much faith. But love written by God rarely arrives that way. It does not cater to impatience. It does not obey logic. It reshapes the one who is willing to wait, not because waiting is noble in itself, but because transformation is necessary for what is coming. You are no longer the same person who first felt this connection. Your prayers sound different now. Your desires are cleaner. Your fears are more visible to you, and therefore less powerful. You are no longer asking God to give you what you want at any cost. You are asking Him to protect your heart, even from yourself. That is maturity, and maturity changes what you are able to receive. There was a time when you believed love would save you. Now you understand that love is not meant to rescue, it is meant to walk beside. You have learned that no person can fill what only God can hold. And because of that, you are no longer approaching this story from emptiness, but from fullness. You are no longer reaching for completion, but for alignment. This is why the waiting has felt so long. Not because God was slow, but because you were being rewired. If this love had returned to you earlier, it might have become an idol. You might have leaned on it instead of leaning into God. You might have made it responsible for your healing, your joy, your sense of worth. And God loves you too much to allow that. He will not give you a blessing that replaces Him. He will only give you a blessing that reflects Him. So He waited. And while you waited, He taught you how to breathe without guarantees. How to trust without proof. How to let go without bitterness. How to love without possession. These are not lessons learned in comfort. They are learned in absence, in uncertainty, in nights where you had no choice but to hand your heart back to God again and again. Every time you did that, something shifted. You may not have felt it, but each surrender loosened the grip fear had on you. Each unanswered prayer refined your motives. Each moment of doubt forced you to choose faith deliberately, not emotionally. You stopped believing because it felt good, and started believing because you decided to trust God's character, not your circumstances. This is where real faith begins. And it is here, right here, that many people misunderstand God. They assume that if it hurts, it must be wrong. That if it takes time, it must not be meant. That if silence stretches on, it must mean no. But God's no brings closure. His silence brings transformation. You are not stuck. You are being shaped. There is also something else happening that you may not want to admit. You are learning how to live well even without the outcome you desire. Not because you stopped wanting it, but because you stopped needing it to survive. And this, paradoxically, is what prepares you to receive it. Desperation repels alignment. Wholeness attracts it. When you no longer need the story to validate you, you become capable of participating in it freely. You can choose love instead of clinging to it. You can enter without fear of losing yourself. You can stay present without anxiety about the future. And that is the only state in which sacred love can thrive. This is not about proving loyalty to God through suffering. It is about learning how to hold love without fear. The person connected to this story is also changing. Even if you cannot see it. Even if you cannot feel it clearly. Growth rarely announces itself. It happens quietly, often through discomfort. God may be dismantling patterns in them that once made union impossible. He may be confronting them with truths they avoided. He may be teaching them how to love without control, how to choose without running, how to face depth without escaping. And yes, it may be taking longer than you want. But depth always does. You are not waiting because God enjoys withholding. You are waiting because shallow connections are common, and what is rare requires patience. Anything that carries purpose must be able to withstand time. Anything that serves more than desire must be rooted in something deeper than emotion. This story is not only about two hearts meeting. It is about two souls becoming capable of standing together without losing God at the center. That kind of union cannot be rushed. And here is something you need to hear clearly. Trusting God does not mean you stop feeling tired. It does not mean you never question again. It does not mean the ache disappears completely. Faith is not numbness. Faith is choosing to remain open even when it would be easier to shut down. Some days you will feel strong. Other days you will feel fragile. Both are allowed. God is not asking you to be perfect in your waiting, only honest. There is room in this process for grief, for frustration, for tears that come without explanation. You do not dishonor faith by admitting that the waiting hurts. Even Jesus wept over what he knew would be redeemed. Pain does not mean lack of trust, it means you care. What matters is that you do not let pain harden you. Hardness is what delays fulfillment more than time ever could. Softness keeps you aligned. Softness keeps you teachable. Softness keeps your heart receptive to whatever form the answer takes. And yes, there is still uncertainty. There always is when God is involved. But uncertainty does not mean danger. It means you are not in control, and that is exactly where miracles live. One day, whether soon or later, clarity will arrive. Not necessarily in the way you imagine, but in a way that feels unmistakably true. When that moment comes, you will not need to analyze it. You will not need to ask everyone for confirmation. You will recognize it the way you recognize your own breath. Until then, your role is not to wait anxiously, but to live faithfully. Live with integrity. Love with openness. Grow with humility. Trust without forcing. Let your life continue to expand instead of shrinking around expectation. Do not put your joy on hold. Do not postpone your becoming. Do not measure your worth by an unanswered prayer. God is not late. He is thorough. And when you look back at this season, this long, quiet, stretching season, you will not only see what you waited for. You will see who you became. You will see how your faith deepened, how your heart softened, how your love matured, how your dependence shifted from outcomes to God Himself. That is the real miracle. And whatever the final shape of this story turns out to be, union, reunion, or redirection, you will meet it as someone whole, grounded, and unafraid. Not because the waiting was easy, but because it was meaningful. So stay open a little longer. Not because you are weak, but because you are ready.